White folks' number one tribulation. Ownership means domination. Change ownership to change the system. It's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end of capitalism. The number two barrier to our dreams. Banker money and pyramid schemes. Change the money to change the system. It's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end of capitalism. They tell us number three's up on top. Monopoly markets need to stop. Change the markets to change the system. It's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end of capitalism. Ecological bottom lines. Management fails every time. Change management to change the system. It's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end of capitalism. Measure happiness and well-being. GDP doesn't tell us anything. Change the metrics to change the system. It's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end of capitalism. Billions still live in poverty. Mass unemployment, runaway inequality. Basic income would change the system. It's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end of capitalism. White patriarchal supremacy. Change the climate and kill biodiversity. Change the culture to change the system. It's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end of capitalism.
All right.
What a
Oops.
wonderful way to start.
I just got to turn off music now. Where
You're
did
good.
it
Uh,
go?
Thank you so much for being here tonight with the Alliance for Just Money and Gwendolyn Hallsmith. It has been a while since we've done one of these coffee houses, so very happy to be back with you all. I just want to lay out some community guidelines first, and then we will dive into Gwen's presentation. And if you couldn't tell, that was her singing. So, the Alliance for Just Money, our main goal is to educate and advocate for monetary reform. We are all volunteers, so we like to set a space that feels good for all of us, even in times when we might feel a little uncomfortable, because we are talking about things that aren't always easy. So our first guideline is respecting differences and being open to diverse perspectives and identities, striving to understand the experiences and viewpoints of others, and taking responsibility for the intent and impact of your words. Avoid personal attacks, microaggressions, etc. That's not respecting each other's differences. Our second guideline is recognize social and power dynamics, thinking consciously of your social positions, allowing us to work across our gender, age, class, race, sexuality, and all of the other identities that are so important in making us who we are. And notice whose voices and perspectives are present and those that are absent, and being mindful of that. Be open to discomfort and learning, acknowledge your values and visions, but be ready to have them challenged. Assume good intention in others and exercise respect and compassion in challenging others' ideas. We may not always agree on everything, but respecting each other is a big thing. Speak thoughtfully, be clear and concise, avoid acronyms, and clarify any technical jargon. I always like to add, if you hear an acronym, spell it out in the chat if you know what it means. There might be somebody who is wondering what it is, but doesn't want to take up the space to figure it out. So let's try to help each other out. Acronyms are everywhere. Listen attentively. Challenge yourself to listen more than you speak and actively listen to understand before you respond. Silence is okay. I know it feels a little awkward, but it's good. It means that we're thinking. And when we think about what we're about to say, we tend to say better things. And then respect your needs. Like I said, we are volunteers. So ask for help, support when you need it. And if you need to step away, stand up, stretch a little, move a little, that's totally fine. You are welcome to get whatever you need to be comfortable in this space. And also we started our end of year fundraising campaign. We started with Sweetest Day, and we really could not do this work without you all and your contributions, whether it be with time, money, your love, your support. We need it all. So I will put our donation link in the chat if you feel so inclined. There will be plenty of opportunities over the next couple of months for you to give, but we will gladly accept them tonight if you feel so inclined. And with that, I will introduce Gwen, who is our speaker this evening. So Gwendolyn Hallsmith is the Executive Director of Global Community Initiatives, a nonprofit organization that she founded in 2002. She's the author of 6 books, many articles, podcasts, and videos on sustainable community and economic development based on systems thinking and global ethics, and has worked with communities all over the world to foster caring communities, local economies, good governance, efficient infrastructure and services, and healthy ecosystems. So this has included work in government at the local, regional, and state levels, and on projects funded by bilateral and multilateral donors at the international level. Very proud of the work that you've done. She's been a member of the balloting group since 1993, which is where she learned applied systems thinking. She founded Vermonters for a New Economy to work on economic solutions at the state level, and the Headwaters Garden and Learning Center, an eco-village and private community land trust in Cabot, Vermont. She and her husband, Michael Taub, sing in a folk duo called the New Economistas, which is who we heard at the start of this meeting, if you were here for that. And she has a master's degree in public policy from Brown University and did additional graduate work at the University of British Columbia and the Andover Newton Divinity School. She is currently a doctoral candidate at Concordia University in Montreal in the Geography, Urban, and Environmental Studies Department, with a focus on land reparations and Indigenous land tenure. So, wow, we have a very special guest with us. And without further ado, I would love to pass it over to you, Gwen.
All right, thank you. It's great to be here. Hello, everybody. Great to see some familiar faces in the audience. I didn't know I'd do that today, but I'm going to share my screen so I can use my slides for the talk. I want to encourage you to ask me questions even during the talk if you don't understand something, because, you know, that's important. I want everybody to understand what I'm saying. It's not always that easy to understand. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is a system dynamics view on economic systems change. What do I mean by this? You know, how do people that understand systems look at the economy, and where might the economy change is the question I'm trying to answer. But I'm sure other people in the room have other ideas about how the economy might change. I've certainly run into them in my time. If you were, let's say, a dialectical materialist, you might call for dictatorship of the proletariat, right? If you were an economic reformer, you might call for incremental change. There is lots of different ideas about this, and I'm going to try to really zero in on the system piece of it. So things to consider as we start, how does our economic system actually work? How do systems change? Where are the leverage points, and how do we take action? When we call it an economic system, but I'm not sure everybody that even calls it that understands, what systems actually are and how they change. So I'm going to cover that tonight. I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of detail about system dynamics, but I'll share a little, and I can assure you that if you are interested in learning more, there are books for free on my website that you can download and read. So how does our economic system work? Well, first of all, what is a system? A system, according to one of my mentors, Danella Meadows, is a set of related components that work together in a particular environment to perform whatever functions they are required to achieve the system's objective. So systems often have goals. Sometimes you can't even see those goals or understand them, but they are component parts that work together and achieve the goals. And economic systems and community systems often have a goal of meeting human needs. We have a wide variety of human needs, social needs like care and education and health, governance needs like equity and self-determination and conflict resolution, economic needs for meaningful work and a good income, and material needs. Now, the material needs cover a lot of the things we often think of. That ranges from everything from water and air and soil and food to housing and infrastructure and communication systems. But we take action to meet those needs. And the action that we can take is dependent on the capacity of the system to supply them. So the action that I take when I'm looking for housing in North America is quite different than my colleagues in South Africa, who were often building their houses out of found materials, whereas I'm looking in the real estate ads for listings, right? Now, the capacity in turn is influenced by all of the natural regeneration rates, natural and human regeneration rates for those things that meet our needs. And obviously, the action we take and the capacity has an influence on our ability to take action in the future. This basic diagram where we show how things are connected and how they loop back on each other is a very basic system understanding. You have to start seeing things in circles instead of in straight lines. So some of the tools of people that like to consider them systems thinking are, making connections where it seems like there's disconnection. Again, looking at linear causality versus cyclical causality or circular causality. Putting things in silos or understanding that when systems parts are all working together, you have what they call emergence, which basically means that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. What a whole system can do is quite different than what its parts can do when they're working alone. There's parts and wholes. You want to look for wholes when you're looking in systems. There's the difference between analysis and synthesis. Analysis is always breaking things down into their smaller parts. Synthesis is trying to pull all those parts together to see how they fit. Again, the old paradigm of isolation is replaced with a new paradigm of relationships when you're looking at systems and trying to understand systems thinking. All right, with that as a bit of background, what exactly is the economic system? Well, the part on the left here, the water, air, land, animals, plants, minerals, oceans, rivers, and forests that make up of our global ecosystem, that's not the economic system. That's our life support system, and that is far more important than the economic system. But obviously, the economic system has a fairly substantial impact on it. Now, it's driven by human needs. The economic system. It's formed and shaped by laws, regulations, rules, and customs. Most of the things we'll be talking about, like money and markets, those are things that are human creations. They are not the kinds of creations that our life support systems are, and they can change. That's the most important point. The economic system facilitates and benefits businesses and organizations. It is set up to make them work well. It requires public infrastructure like roads, transportation, water treatment, waste management, communication, and housing. Those are often provided by government and by the public for private profit. The current goals are profit and productivity maximization. Value for shareholders. That is the top goal of most corporations right now. And if they even falter in their regular quarterly reports, things can change dramatically. CEOs can be replaced. So it's not so easy just to ask a company to start behaving nicely when these internal institutions and dynamics keep them operating in different ways. Now, the economy is a complex system. It's not a simple system. And what do we mean by a complex system? In a complex system, feedback drives change. It's a dynamic system. There's dynamic change over time. And there are emergent properties. So sometimes things that the whole system does is very different than the parts do. A classic case of this is an airplane. You know, if all the parts to an airplane suddenly found themselves at 20,000 feet, they would fall to the ground. But when they're working together as a system, they're able to fly. That's a good emergent property, perhaps, where the system's working correctly and everything works right and the airplane stays in the sky. But there are also problematic emergent properties like gridlock in a city. If you were just trying to figure out where one car was going that day, you wouldn't necessarily anticipate gridlock. But the gridlock is an emergent property of a transportation system when it gets overloaded. So understanding that it's a complex system also helps understand how to change it. Now, the economy has these 5 key institutions, I'm arguing, that actually form the container that helps us meet all of our needs. These are almost invisible structures and institutions that shape everything that happens in the economy. And they're ownership, money, markets, management, and metrics. I'm going to go into this in more detail, but it's easy to remember because it forms what I think is a nice mnemonic for the new economy, which is OM, right? Ownership, money, markets, management, and metrics. And interestingly enough, they are listed in order of importance. So in an order of leverage for change. So ownership, what do I mean by ownership? Well, if you think about ownership as a form of interaction among humans, back in time, people owned people, and we called that slavery. Women have been owned by their husbands for thousands of years. So I think I have a slightly different perspective on this than other people. Children are owned by their parents and can still be sold in many parts of the world. And enslaved people are denied fundamental human rights, which is we think of as a crime against humanity. But when we own Mother Earth, we're treating the earth as our slave and not as our sacred mother. And this is where I think some of the white supremacist culture and European domination of the planet has run into trouble with Indigenous people, and also has been a major shift in thinking, because the vast majority of Indigenous people on the planet don't imagine that you can own Mother Earth. It was a form of blasphemy to suggest that. And so to have the Europeans show up and start owning everything was a real problem. And what do people own? You know, this is, I know this is a funny looking slide, but it goes all the way back to 1700. And it talks about all of these kind of assets that we tend to own: real estate, business, stocks, bonds, money, and productive capacity and goods. All of these assets are things that people own. And you can see back in the 1700s, more than half of the capital in Britain was land. So we have gone from a system where land ownership provided the form of wealth that we had to one where the ownership of other types of capital, either housing or stocks or money, have virtually replaced land as the main source of capital in our economy. I just think that's really interesting, because if you think about it, all of the land theft that occurred between about 1700, even earlier, it's really started around 1500, 1580, in these years of colonization, actually, you know, transferred lots of wealth from indigenous people and others to the wealthy colonizers. And the colonization conflict that resulted, of course, is still going on today. You know, we think of this thing as being in the past, but in fact, when you look at the type of resistance that's going on to pipelines over indigenous lands and other activities on indigenous lands, it hasn't stopped. It has continued on, and it goes on until this day. And we really need to put a stop to it, for one thing, and to make reparations to the people that we have harmed in this process. Now, the corporate era has brought on an entirely new type of ownership. It actually changed ownership substantially and problematically for the kinds of goals we have for human solidarity and ecological sustainability. The corporate era was brought in with, you know, robber barons and leverage buyouts and stock buybacks going on today. That is just a way of inflating the value of these companies and making people rich while robbing the workers and the public and nature of the things that they need the most. This is, if you read this book by Marjorie Kelly, excuse me, she talks about shareholder primacy being the thing that drives a lot of economic decision-making, that profit for the shareholders is the thing that drives the decision-making at companies, and both the workers' health, well-being, and economic prosperity and nature's abundance are what gets sacrificed for that. Bondholder primacy is basically the same kind of thing. We have seen over the last millennia, really, but especially accelerating in the last 20 to 30 years, where public goods are being privatized. Even public infrastructure systems are being privatized. Like in France, they sold a major highway with tolls to a big company to run. In all sorts of water districts around the United States and other places, water supplies and water services that formerly were public goods have been sold to the highest bidder. And the result has not been a good result. Privatization is not the way to go. Services have not been improved. Costs have not come down. All we have added is the profit motive to what ought to be a public good and maybe a human right. Of course, externalities is another economic feature of this new corporate era, where the real costs of extracting fossil fuels, of the kind of resource depletion that we're seeing is not, and pollution, air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution. None of that is accounted for in the price. None of that is accounted for. And it, again, we have private profit and public costs because the public is left to clean up the mess. Now, there are new forms of ownership that provide us with some hope, different than the traditional ones, like cooperatives and employee-owned businesses and ESOPs, community land trusts, nonprofit organizations, and benefit corporations, which are B Corps. All of these are changing the landscape of ownership, and the more we work on these sorts of alternatives, the more leverage we have for improving the economy for everyone. Now, what I'm sure most of you are here to talk about, money, is, of course, the second thing. Now, when I was looking, you know, most of you know who know me know that I worked on monetary reform for a long time. But ultimately, when I started considering the entire economy, it occurred to me that the problem with money is who owns it. So ownership actually is still more important than money, but money is the operating system of the global economy, and understanding it is critical to understanding how we need to reform. So what is money exactly? Now, if you've taken an economics class, you'll probably answer, well, it's a means of exchange, it's a unit of account, it's a store of value. And those are things that money does, but it's not what money is, actually. What money is an agreement. It's an agreement that will use a particular thing or note or system or banking system for these types of activities, exchanging things counting things and storing value for the future. Now, the system conditions that are problematic in our current monetary system include that it's privately owned. Most of the money that comes into existence is owned by the private sector. It's debt-based, so it comes into existence. It's born through the issuance of debt. It has positive interest, so it's not issued without needing to have interest to pay it back. It's a monoculture, which means that no matter whether you're talking about yen or dollars or pesos or dinero, it is all basically the same system regulated by the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, and all of it is benefiting the people that own the banks to the rest of our detriment. It's also a monopoly. When a government designates a particular kind of money to pay taxes and debts, it essentially gives a monopoly to whoever is in control of that money. And we know that who is in control of that money in our current system are the bankers. So 90%, 97% of the money in circulation comes into being through the issuance of debt in the banking and finance sectors. Banks make money by supplying us with money. They create it out of thin air and charge us to use it. That's a pretty good business model if you can get it. When you look at the profitability of a lot of the corporations in the country, the Federal Reserve Bank is up on top. Actually, it's one of the more profitable institutions we have. Of course, that money doesn't necessarily benefit us. Indebted people pay the interest to the banks and their owners. The burden of interest payments keeps people enslaved as effectively as feudal bonds did back in the day. Here's an example. This is from the economic crash back in 2008, where she's already paid $125,000 on a house that's worth $91,000, and they're taking it away because she still owes them hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, that's the kind of crazy system that we have. Now, this debt-based money that we're using has a bunch of bad impacts: the growth imperative, environmental destruction, human poverty, species extinction, and global war. Those are all part and parcel of the system that we're using, and are a lot of the reason we need to make it change. The growth imperative in particular drives a lot of this. And when you're issuing money as debt into a large system, it's like a no-win game. In order for you to pay off your debt, somebody else has to lose. Somebody else has to lose. So in order to make everybody whole, there's this idea that we just have to grow the economy because then we'll have more money to pay back the interest on the debt. And it's a vicious circle. It doesn't get paid back. And the growth imperative drives environmental destruction, human poverty, and species extinction. It also contributes to the instincts of people to go to war. Now, a money monoculture, like we have just this one kind of bank issued debt money running the entire economy, is as problematic as planting a single species forest. Because if one little thing goes wrong, like in a forest, you get a particular pest that wipes it out. But in the monetary system, if the bankers suddenly are making more loans to people that can't pay them back and the entire economy comes crashing down because of their bad decisions, that's a problem of the monoculture. Now, one way to diversify the money that we use is through public banks and cryptocurrencies that are owned by the public, where the profits benefit the public. They could serve as a clearinghouse for special purpose currencies. They can be regulated like a public utility, owned by public institutions. I mean, all of these things are possible. It just doesn't happen now. Cryptocurrencies, for example, are still all private. There is no real public cryptocurrency. So they are really no better in many ways than the existing system. They're payment vehicles for the existing system because all of them are turned back into dollars at some point. And pretty much the same criticism can be levied at public banks. They are not necessarily changing the system. They're setting up a public version of it where the profits can benefit the public, but it's increasingly difficult to do in a largely privatized system. So the solution, in my view, is to create an ecosystem of currencies where not just one currency is what we use for everything. And there's a lot of them to choose from. It doesn't necessarily have to be 5 of them like this or these particular ones, but I think having more than just the bank debt money circulating in our economy so that we can meet our needs in different ways and not be reliant on that bank debt money would be very healthy. After all, it makes some sense to keep bank debt money in the system for business lending, for people that are aiming to make a profit with the loans that they're getting from the banks. But for students, for housing, for all of the things that we need in our lives, it just makes no sense at all. And we're all basically slaving away to make the rich people that own the banks more wealthy. That's where the money system is entirely where the 1% comes from. We wouldn't have a 1% and a 99% if we had a different system. So another economic institution that is responsible for some of our problems are the markets. Now, markets themselves have been around as long as human history. I don't think we'll ever get rid of them. But nowadays, with the billionaires hoarding wealth and the largely concentrated form of wealth that we are seeing in late stage capitalism, the markets are manipulated. They're not free markets. You know, that there's these nano market trading that has come in, that where people describe the things that go on in Goldman Sachs in their black box. You know, the regular traders can't even do trading like they used to anymore. That was very well described in a book by a guy who worked at the Royal Bank of Canada, called Fast Boys, I think was the name of it, back when the nanotechnology was first coming in. And they're monopolized markets. So they're manipulated and they're monopolized. And that makes it difficult for people who are just in a small business somewhere to make ends meet. All of these types of markets, the real estate market, the stock market, the bond market, the currency, especially the gold and silver market and the private cryptocurrencies, all have a level of manipulation by the people who are wealthy enough to do it. That's why they call them market makers. But they are market trends. There are market trends toward a better future. Hazel Henderson, may she rest in peace, she died not too long ago, writes about this with her Ethical Market book. I'd recommend reading it. But the LOHAS market, now there's an acronym that stands for Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability. That is a multi-trillion market now in developed countries. That is where people are buying things that are making them more healthy and making things more sustainable. That's a positive sign, even though consumption doesn't get us there. But you know, the green economy, markets for technologies and systems that are trying to clean up the environment. The creative economy has now surpassed the industrial economy in the United States in terms of the number of people employed and the value of the economy. The creative economy isn't just artists making paintings, but it's website designers, it's Hollywood, it's a lot of the engineers and architects that are creating new things. People that make stuff up for a living constitute the creative economy. So authors, artists, musicians, all of those are now beyond the industrial economy in the United States anyway, in terms of their contribution. Fair trade, for the fair trade movement. You know, you can now go into stores and see things that come from other parts of the world being labeled with a fair trade label. Organic certification, another thing that has shifted the market in a good way. And of course, forest management certification for forest products. All of these certifications and regulations and outpourings of human creativity, I think, are really a positive trend. And I think they also show us the ways in which markets can change for the better. Management includes all the ways businesses do their business. So all the ways they handle waste products, the way they treat their employees, you know, all the sorts of practices that we were talking about 20 years ago when we were talking about socially responsible business practices. This is what we're talking about with management. And obviously, there's been a lot of progress in corporate responsibility and managing things for the better. There's whole systems accounting, which brings all of the costs and impacts into the business accounting system, cradle to cradle production, where companies now look at what they're making and where it's thrown out, and they try to make sure that the waste products and everything else that goes into that comes back into their business. And in Germany now, and other parts of Europe, there's even legislation that requires this, that requires businesses that produce waste to make sure that they handle that waste, even if it's after consumption, after the consumers have bought it from them. Employee benefits is one form of corporate responsibility, making sure that your employees are well cared for, that they have profit sharing plans, that they are, you know, working in a place with decent daycare for their children. There's lots of work in that. Community contributions, you know, companies want to make it clear that they're a good, responsible community member, and they make contributions to the different charities in the area. And of course, taking responsibility for the ecological and social impacts of their production. This is all sort of the management piece. I think you'll notice that we hear a lot more about markets and management and metrics than we do about money and ownership. And there's a reason for that I'll go into in a minute. Metrics are just how we measure economic progress. And the dominant way we do that now is obviously through the gross domestic product, or GDP. But there are alternatives out there to measure economic progress. With GDP, what happens is anytime you spend money, it's counted in GDP. So when there's an oil tanker spill in the Gulf of Valdez up in Mexico, and they have to spend a lot of money cleaning it up, that adds to the GDP. GDP is going up, it all looks good. Whereas the genuine progress indicator, that takes some of the negatives, like environmental contamination, unemployment, water pollution, ozone depletion, family breakdown, lost leisure time, all of these sort of negative things, and balances the money we spend with the other things that are happening in the economy to come up with a different metric. The gross national happiness metric, this originated in Bhutan, when the king of Bhutan was trained at Harvard, I guess. And now they measure their economic progress by measuring the happiness of their people. There's lots of ways to do this too. It's more of a qualitative discussion than a quantitative one, but there is a gross national happiness USA that's working on that. And I'm sure if you're interested, you can find out more about that. Now, how do systems change? These are the systems that need to change, and how it's possible to change them is, I think, a really interesting question. Leverage points are what we're looking for economic system change. And the idea of leverage points comes from work of the people that I know that were involved in modeling the economy and the environment back from the 1970s on. So Donella Meadows and Dennis Meadows and the people that plugged all the information into the supercomputers at MIT back in 1970s to try and figure out what was going to happen in the future if we kept on the same path. And they found and predicted quite accurately where we are right now using those models. And as I said, Donella Meadows was one of my mentors. And I asked her at one point, you know, Donella, are there any sort of generalizable lessons that you've learned from all of these models? And this is what she came up with, this idea that there's increasing leverage as you go from the problem that you can see on the surface to the patterns of behavior that are below that problem, to the systemic structure below the patterns of behavior. And all of that's floating around in mindsets and culture. So there were a number of different system intervention points that Donella identified, and they are arranged here in order of leverage. So what has higher leverage for system change than other things? The first one, constant parameters, numbers like subsidies, taxes, and standards. If you think about it, adding a tax or adding a subsidy or changing the standards on something is some of our quick and easy policy interventions. And they sometimes work, but they are at the low end of the leverage power that these intervention points have. The size of buffers and stocks relative to their flows. This is another system intervention point. So if you can increase the stock of something or put up, let's say, water control dams in a river basin that would help keep stock and keep flows under control. That's another leverage point. Again, down near the bottom of the effectiveness system or ruling here. So the structure of material stocks and flows, another system intervention point in the economy, that might be changing the structure of a market, looking at how we do markets differently, or how to sell things more inexpensively, and all of those intersections. Again, a point of intervention, not a very high leverage one. The length of delay between cause and effect. That's a really important one in terms of ecosystems in particular. And we're getting into higher leverage when we're slowing down delay. Now, the length of delay between cause and effect also can come when you have additional information flows that go back and loop back to the people that need the information. So all of the work on metrics and measuring what matters and indicators, all of that work actually is aimed at shortening the length of delay between cause and effect and between sort of action and reaction, right? Self-correcting mechanisms, another intersecting point, another intervention point. This would be things like the pressure temperature valve on your water heater, something that provides essentially negative feedback in a process that might be escalating out of control. Self-reinforcing mechanisms. These are things that if there's something good happening, they help keep it going and keep it going well. Contagious enthusiasm, I think about that, or things that when things start going well, you start to be able to do other things. A self-reinforcing mechanism might be, in fact, things like the interest accruing in your bank account. That's a self-reinforcing mechanism for keeping the money in your bank account. The flow, accessibility, and timing of information. Again, here we are back at indicators and metrics, but that has a lot to do with leverage and changing systems, and we're getting up higher in the level of leverage. Rules and regulations, very important. If you can change the rules of the game, that's a high leverage thing to do. And if we're looking at changing the way markets work, changing the way money works, changing the way ownership works, all of those are rules and regulations, and they are powerful. Up here in Canada, for example, where I live now, the Canadian government decided to address their affordable housing problem by passing rules that prohibit foreign buyers to buy real estate here in Canada. That's a rule and regulation directly related to ownership that has a very high leverage in terms of stopping an inflow of money that would drive the costs of housing here up higher than they are. Participatory democratic practice, the more you get people working together and self-organizing, solving their own problems, essentially by working together and setting up community organizations, setting up different initiatives that can be done. That's, again, very high leverage, much more powerful than some of the earlier ones we talked about. Setting conscious goals for the system, so that making a goal of our economic system being human well-being and environmental integrity would be a whole lot different than maximizing profit and productivity. And of course, the very highest one, which is shifting the paradigm and mindset that you're working in. So that, to Donella, from her work modeling the economy and the environment on computers, was the highest leverage point there is. So when we're looking at these 5 subsystems of the economy, and we're looking at the leverage over ownership, there's a bunch of different things that we can do that would recognize that, recognizing the universal rights for land, the rights for a living, paying birthright dividends like they do in Alaska, restructure enterprises toward local worker owners, employee stock ownership programs, community land trusts, public banks, and public money all come under the kind of leverage that we would have over this ownership model that we all have in our heads. This is a paradigm and mindset change. It's also changing the goals of the system, the distribution of power over the rules, and the rules of the system. This is very high leverage for changing the economic system. Money leverage, again, public banks and public money, special purpose currencies to manage universal basic income, caring for people and nature, all sorts of different types of purposes that money could be put toward that would change the economic system are what we're talking about here. Again, it's a paradigm and mindset change. It changes the goals of the system, distribution of power over the rules of the system. It'd be very high leverage. Now, the fact that these are very high leverage also means they're very difficult to do. The other facet of working with systems is that you understand that they don't always change easily. You know, the system is designed to stay the way it is. And if you don't intervene in a way that's thoughtful about how systems work, you can end up making it a lot worse. I have lots of examples of that I won't go into now. But market leverage, so set policies to fully account for all the costs in any production process and eliminate externalities. You know, make sure that companies that are polluting clean up their pollution. Require consumer transparencies for products that use finite resources or have harmful emissions or effects. You know, in Vermont, we ran a campaign to make sure that genetically modified organisms were not allowed in our food. And that campaign led to GMOs being labeled around the country. But good grief, in most European countries, GMOs are prohibited, not just labeled. So, you know, we really do need to pay more attention to that. Again, market leverage is the rules of the system, information flows, material flows, and the nodes of intersection. So it's high leverage, not as high as money and ownership. Management levels, leverage includes cradle to cradle production, all the kinds of things I mentioned before, supporting local investment. These are the rules of the system, information flows and material flows, and also very high leverage, but not as high as money and ownership. And metrics, again, measuring what matters, transparency, feedback, and public accounting. These are information flows, driving positive feedback loops with medium leverage to change the system. So looking at the entire economic system from a systems point of view points to certain things that would work very well to help move us into a new economy. Taking action on those things is an entirely different subject. I recognize that. And I've also written a few books and step-by-step workbooks that you can download at no charge from either globalcommunity.org or hallsmith.org under the writing. If you're interested in how to organize your local community, to organize a community currency, to change the markets, to do any of the things that I've described at the local level is fundamentally an empowerment and community organizing task. And it's not hard to do, but you do need to get other people involved and find resources to help carry it out. That's the end of my prepared remarks. I hope I haven't gone too long, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions and have a discussion about it. I'd also love it if you put who you are and where you're from in the chat. I meant to mention that at the beginning.
Thank you, Gwen. I see hearts, see claps. Beautiful. I love what you say about the paradigm shift, and I think that that is very real. So I think at this point, we are opening it up for
Nelson.
any questions. Yeah, we already have one.
Hey, Nelson.
I was looking. All right. So yeah, Nelson, go ahead.
Hi, Gwen. Good to see you.
See you.
Thank you. I wanted to find out, first of all, if we can have access to the PowerPoint.
Sure.
Have access to that. And second, can you talk about, you said the higher, two things that you said, the money and the other, what was the other one? That was the highest?
Ownership.
Ownership, right. And that the more important they are, the more difficult they are to change. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So it means like it could take a long time to actually make changes in those areas.
A long time, or some event that makes it happen faster.
Right. So it could be outside. It could be outside your. It could be outside your own control, right?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Okay. That's all I wanted to know.
Yeah, in fact,
And-
I'm not terribly optimistic about money and ownership changing as a result of this coming election, for example. But I think depending on what happens in the economy, like another economic crash is is inevitable. We just don't know exactly when it's going to happen. And
Yeah.
I think the more we can educate people, the more we can get people organized in even little time banks or other things that show what the alternative is like, even if it isn't a complete change, I think can really help prepare for the inevitable next crash.
I just want to say I've been working with the public banking stuff for 12 years now, and I'm continuing to do it. You know, it does take a long time. You know, you need a lot of patience. It's a lot of hard work. But that's kind of like the thing that where I've been trying to put my shoulder to the wheel, if you will. Anyway, that's all I want to say. There are a lot more people that want to talk. Thank you, Gwen. It was great.
Thank you, Nelson.
Presentation. Sure.
I've just put the slideshow in the chat, so you can download it from there.
Okay, thank you.
And Janice, looks like your hand was up next.
Yeah, thank you. There are so many, it's sort of like a meteor shower. There's so many things and ways that are going on and just getting our head wrapped around them. But thank you for your talk, because it's been very helpful to show me things that I hadn't thought of that can help pull some things together. Something that occurred to me when you were talking about corporations and stockholders, John Kenneth Galbraith kind of spent his whole 100-year life writing about several things. One of them was the fraudulent aspect of the Federal Reserve. He didn't like it, even though he was the preeminent economist of the 20th century, and he managed to toe the line. So I direct anyone who cares to look at Galbraith as an early time rebel who wrote in a way that was keeping him acceptable, which is really fascinating. And I think we can gather some communication strategy from him, although we don't have to copy him. The same thing with John Maynard Keynes. He was always struggling. He was a Fabian socialist, and yet he had to represent the establishment British government throughout the 20th century, well, halfway. So just those couple things. And also, Galbraith kind of led me to the idea, and you can see this today, that stockholders are practically impotent in the corporate power structure. And I believe he's been saying for a long time, and it's beginning to show up very slowly, that the real power is in the hands of the managers. So which kind of flows upward toward the CEO, the CFO.
And they're
and the
often the biggest owners anyway. You know,
right,
little
the upper management.
individual shareholders don't have much power, but
Right.
making
So I
profit
just
for
want,
the people that own the company is still the top goal.
yeah, for sure. And I'm not sure what I'm even saying with that, other than just to draw our attention to it as something to keep in mind when we're negotiating with these guys, because their power structure is actually a house of cards. Number one, they're supposed to live in a competitive world, and they have created a monopoly. This goes back to Queen Elizabeth when she granted a charter to the British East India Company. They provided the monarchy with money, and she provided them with legislative muscle. And it's still the same today. They buy their way into legislative muscle, they take control, and they enslave us. But nobody really knows that. It's kind of a secret because it's not mentioned. So I also mentioned that just for our consideration. And we can move, not that I know the answer or anything, I'm just, a novice, but it can come together kind of radically if a bunch of us know a lot of this foundational information, and then it can kind of, weave itself together. So I'm just leaving it out there for whatever and whoever. Thank you so much. Your presentation was fabulous. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. All right, who's next?
Mark.
Mark.
Hey, Gwen, thanks for your presentation. Now, on your slideshow, you had one slide that had several different types of currencies. I remember time, care. Can't remember what the other ones were.
Food.
I wondered if you could go into a little more depth about what each one of those were and
Oh, I'd
how it would
love
work.
to.
If it
Fact,
takes too long, you
there
don't
is
have to.
a
I don't want to take up
free
too much
book.
time, but
There's a
I
free
was
book I wrote about it that you can get on my website. I'll just stick it in the chat. It's called Creating Wealth, and I'll put the book in the chat, and it describes in detail a lot of that, those types of currency. But quickly, a time bank is a system where people exchange time instead of money. Everybody's time is worth the same, which makes it kind of a great equalizing force. And in the United States, where it's often very tricky to develop complementary currencies, time banks are considered voluntary time, and so they're tax exempt. So I've just put that book in the chat, so you can download it from there. It's also on these websites. I don't charge people for the books, so you can get them for free. A food currency is like food stamps is a food currency the US issues. That's a simple one that everybody knows about. I also designed one for Central Vermont where food in storage was going to be the basis for the value, and people would exchange shares for the food in storage, and they always would know they could go back to either get the food in storage, or they could use their shares to pay their hairdresser or the restaurant or the grocery store, because the grocery store could then either go get the food or use the shares to pay its employees or some of the bills. There's commercial barter currencies, are another one that I mentioned there. One of the most famous and longstanding ones is the Wehr system in Germany. That was created after the last big economic depression in the 30s, where a bunch of businesses got together and they realized, the reason I need this credit line that the bank has just pulled because of the crash is because I need to pay you for the materials that I use in my production process before I get paid by the consumers. Addressing that gap in production between the costs of production and sales to consumers is actually a really fertile ground for complementary currencies. And they developed the Wehr system, which was just a system of exchanging debits and credits. They were all denominated in Swiss francs, but they didn't actually get the Swiss francs from the banks to do it. They just traded it with each other. And that system has grown exponentially because of its success in Switzerland. And now trillions of dollars in the small and medium enterprises there are exchanged in the Wehr every year. And it's a large part of the reason the Swiss economy is a relatively stable one compared to others, because it has a dual currency system, one for the businesses and one for regular, the national debt-based money. Trying to think if there's another one that I mentioned there, but that's a summary. There's education currencies. There's care banks. Care banks was a system I set up out of a time bank in Vermont where we used it for elder care, and it had some very special features that enabled it to be used for elder care. We got a big grant, about $1 million from the Administration on Aging to implement that program. And it worked great while it was running. I don't live there anymore, so I don't know whether it's still running, but the time bank there is still running. It's called the Onion River Exchange, and you can look it up online. And basically, time banks work a little bit like Facebook. You set up a profile and you have offers and requests that you want to exchange. And, people respond to those offers and requests. So they're all over the world now, time banks, and they're very effective. They're small, usually they're not huge, but I think they're very important because they do teach people that these dollar bills we have in our pocket are not the only way we can exchange things with each other, and not the only way we can and have value, even as human beings. The unfortunate part of the monetary system is it tends to only value things that are scarce, because it's artificially scarce. The banks keep it artificially scarce because they wouldn't have anybody paying them interest on their loans if the supply of money was actually sufficient. And so I think it's a really good thing to help change the paradigm in the mindset, even though it's not an answer in itself.
Thank you.
I think Jerry has their hand up.
Thank you. Let me lower it here somewhere. Um, Thank you for this. And I got an invitation for this from my friend, I think, Fernanda. I'm familiar with everything you're talking about. I've been a student of systems thinking, systems theory for over 50 years. I've written about it, published articles about it, got a curriculum, taught it. There's 27 people in this conversation. How do you get this kind of, Gwendolyn, you must come across this. How do you get this kind of thinking out there?
Well,
People don't think this way. There's 27 of us here.
I did develop a methodology for
I've
city
been in,
planning that uses
I've
it.
taken Fritjof Capra's course. I'm an alumni of that. I mean, it's just, I've done everything. I even taught this stuff, but it's very difficult to teach. And I've always been looking for a pedagogy. How do you teach systems thinking? You know, and I'm very interested in, you know, I remember Jay Forrester, you know, and the world model, and Donella Meadows. I've got her books. It's so hard. It's so hard. It is so elitist. It's so difficult. There's this organization, you're familiar with it, I'm sure, the International Society for the Systems Sciences. You know, it's kind of the premier systems theory organization. I paid expensive dues for that for a number of years until I finally realized, when they sent us the membership list, there's 500 people in this organization. 2 Nobel laureates have run it, but 500 people, 498 of which are academics. I was a practitioner. I mean, I love it. It's my life. It's my view of the world. Gwendolyn, how do you do it? Nobody listens. There's 6 of us now.
We're in it together, Jerry. Don't lose hope.
Don't
Or
lose
else
hope.
passive.
And it's a bigger subject than I've covered tonight, for sure. I usually do a little introduction on stocks and flows and feedback loops, but you know, we didn't have that time. But
I
I think
actually do the modeling. I used to work with Benson, you know, but no more.
well, I developed a city planning methodology that used it. So I was training city planners all over on basic systems thinking, and it worked pretty well that way. But it's true, it's not an easy thing. I think people are going to need to start learning it in elementary school. It's just not the way we're taught. Cause effect. It's not
I will
really
write to you
cause
about
and
that.
effect.
I'm very interested in anything to do with city planning, because I and Fernanda are intensely involved with local affairs here regarding city planning.
Well, I'll put up this other book that I wrote that actually talks about city planning and systems thinking, and it gives a little more of a sort of an introduction.
I can't get a copy of Forrester's book on urban system dynamics. It's been out of print for 40 years or something. So
yeah. And then you know, new fads come in, like design thinking, you know, which I haven't quite managed to put my head around. But it's like systems thinking worked for a while as a planning methodology, and I think it'll still work. But I just put that book in the chat so you can download
thank you.
that.
God bless you.
Thank you. Joe, I see Joe. Is that who's next? And Paul?
Hi, thanks very much for that. It was, Janice said, I think she had it right. It was a meteor storm. You're obviously very smart, and you can juggle all these balls, and it kind of takes everybody else's breath away. Nelson, I think, had a good remedy for that, and that is he's focused on one thing, public banking, which I think is a really good thing to choose because it pays benefits to everybody. It provides the funding we need to do a lot of the things you're talking about in terms of education, reducing tuition, getting the potholes filled, getting the infrastructure attended to, what's badly neglected, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing to focus on is something that you've talked about, is the land. Our Henry George friends, cousins, have focused on trying to capture the economic rent and devote it to housing and municipal needs and so forth. And the third thing that we're fighting for, of course, is ending the privatization of money. All three are ownership issues, right? And any one of those things is a handful to focus on. You've given us about a dozen more. People are looking for, they're already overworked. They're exhausted. They're in the rat race. And so I kind of like the approach that Nelson is focused on, picking one and going with it. And those three, I think, are by far the most important. I find the local currency idea kind of contradictory. We really need to fix the monetary system. That's essential. Otherwise, we're doomed. We really need to fix the land system. Otherwise, we're doomed, because those are the two, by far the biggest expenses people have, right? Their housing and their finances, all that bill paying and all the debt that goes along with it. So those are the two things. You may remember, or you may or may not know, we used your public bank video in the conference. And it was kind of the reverse of the blizzard. You stuck with one thing and you did a great job. Simple, really simple. All the benefits were obvious. You characterized the banks very well. And those three things that you, of many, many, many things, are the ones that I think we can all kind of take in. So thanks for that. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Nice to hear from you. Thank you. I see Paul's hand.
That's me. Hi, Gwen. Yeah, thanks very much for that talk. It's very interesting. I think what you're kind of giving us is a pathway to, by the way, I'm a kind of a founding member of the Alliance for Just Money. So I think I can speak for a lot of people that you've given a pathway for all of the things that we hope can be achieved. And by the way, one of the premier analyses of the impacts, the positive impacts of monetary reform was done by Yamaguchi, where he used systems dynamic modeling to take in all these factors and just to show how reforming the money system using that type of modeling really benefits society and the economy. I do want to point out, however, as a monetary reformer, that I don't think that all these aspirations that you have and we have can actually occur until we get money creation to be done by the public and not by private banks. Because the private banks have so much leverage where the money they create goes into speculation and non-productive uses. And until we eliminate that. So I see monetary reform as an enabler. You're providing the path, but I think it's kind of like the key that opens the door to what you're proposing.
It's the operating
That's
system.
my comment.
The monetary system is
Right.
the operating system of the global economy. It's like DOS or that. And
Yes.
it's invisible. Most people don't understand
Absolutely.
or how it works. I completely agree.
Yeah, there's that funny cartoon where I've seen it so many times in relation to this, to monetary reform, where this two fishers are talking to each other, and one fish says, "How's the water?" And the other fish says, "What the hell is water?"
Water, exactly.
That's how we
Wow.
view money. So
We
you're
don't,
very,
don't
very right there.
understand it. Yeah, and we can't. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's very
agree.
difficult.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. There's a bunch of hands now. Who was, I think,
I saw
Kevin.
Kevin go
Kevin.
first, yeah. And then we'll let Dan and Fernanda go, and then Janice, just so we can hear from everybody first. So Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I never know if this equipment works. I unfortunately have been moving and I missed your talk. I came late to the meeting. So
Well,
I
they
want to be very
recorded it, so that's good news. You can watch
okay.
it.
I want to be very quick about my question. I've done a lot of looking into inflation and the Federal Reserve System. It's kind of my opinion that inflation is a requirement of the system in order to make it work. Then you have in the environmental space the argument about the monetary growth imperative, which is the requirement that the financial system devours everything and constantly grows and stuff like that. So this was system dynamics. I was just wondering if you did talk about that particular topic,
Yes.
and how things like the housing bubble, the banks are making more mortgages at higher levels, which ends up creating new money in the economy, which then, because of everybody needing to deal with higher rents and stuff, presses for inflation. Then you get inflation, which of course is blamed on higher wages, but it's the banks that started it in the first place. So anyway, I just was
Yeah, I actually
frustrated.
puzzled over that question for the 6 years I was working on this book, the Creating Wealth book. And there is a system dynamics diagram. I think it's in chapter 4 of the book. It's right here in the chat. You can download it from the chat or get it from one of my websites that describes the system dynamics of the monetary system and why it's growing like it does and what feeds that. I have a whole nother talk on just that. I'd be happy to give some time, but it's a little too much to go into in one short answer. But you're welcome to look it up there and we can be in touch about it. Because it is a system. It's an emergent property of the system, the growth imperative, and human impoverishment. Emergent properties are things where the whole does things that you can't really tell from the individual parts.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we have Dan.
Dan, yep, Dan.
Oh, you don't have your microphone on.
Is that working?
Now I can hear you. Yep.
Yeah, I'd just like to address private banks and public banks. There's some binary economists that have worked out a way for the Federal Reserve to be involved in the creation of money in an honest money system. It's interest-free. It's through Section 13 of the Fed discount window. They're lawyers and economists, so I'm not, but I take their word for it. And we actually got a project passed in Missouri now. The Democratic state Senate put it through, and the Republican governor signed it into law, which kind of shows it brings both sides together. And it's about kind of a prototype project. And of course, the big wall is going to be the Fed. So they're having meetings with the regional Fed there, which is actually kind of owns the central Fed, if you know the dynamics of that. And just to see, because what they use this discount window to give all this interest-free money to connected people, right?
And the
Now they
banks.
want, yeah. And they want to give it to each and every individual a share, but only for the
Guaranteed
purchase
basic
of productive property, carefully vetted productive property, not for consumer stuff, to be paid back with profits from that. And they've accepted my idea of a guaranteed income for people whose investments don't work out, so we can eliminate poverty in the midst of plenty. But I guess my point is that we can't just say throw out all these old guys because they're going to create resistance, or maybe there doesn't have to be as much. And if we look at the last age change, some of the kings and queens, you know, joined in the new, you know, semi-representative legislatures that replaced them. And, you know, French and Russia, not so good, but Holland and England and so on
Off with their heads.
avoided that tragedy. So I think we're dealing with an age change, and huge changes coming up. And the goal is to make it as peaceful as possible. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, one last point, Gwendolyn. I read Fifth Discipline decades ago, one of the biggest influences on my life.
That's it. Well, I took
Systems
with
theory is
Achieving
where it's at.
Sustainable Cities, I took the fifth discipline and applied it to cities.
Yeah, great. Thank you again. Excellent presentation.
Thank you. Fernanda, you're next. I think.
Great job, Gwen. Amazing. Hope we get to close out with another song of yours. I raised my hand to kind of say thank you, and also as a comeback to, I don't know who said that it says kind of like that money reform is necessary before we implement all that you're doing. But I think it's yes and at the same time that we're educating about how corrupt the federal level or global level monetary system is, we can be mobilizing people to just meet their needs in local ways, and that really opens the door for them to, you know, have some backing, like they can see that it works for real. And I think that this strategy is one that we'll be adopting a bit more in AFJM, possibly in our toolkits and whatnot, to just show people the alternative systems. And from there, this knowledge will spread and we'll have the critical mass to get AMRA through the doors and have just money for us at a federal level. And hopefully we won't need those emergency currencies later on, but you know, maybe we'll like them and we'll keep a separate, diverse, not monocrop system of money where we'll have money for food and different types of things. So yeah, love it. Yeah, just kind of whatever you want to say about how we get there. We still need more thoughts on that always. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Dan,
Right now I'm working on giving the land back to the indigenous people because they actually are all about a money-free society and, you know, community ownership of stuff. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think the European paradigm has seen its day and it's time to change it.
Well, now that you mentioned moneyless society, though, how can you say that I've kind of been developing an essay around this, like how can we shape to people who believe in a moneyless society that this is kind of a pathway to get there? Like we're really stuck in our ways right now. Humanity is pretty stubborn. So if we can kind of try out just money, which is a little less of a corrupt money system, then we can eventually move towards moneyless. I don't know. Just
right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Janice. Texas power.
That's it.
Are you on me now?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Fernanda, yeah, building on what you said, and yay, Texas power. Hey, Texas is supposed to be leading the nation, and that's not a brag, it's just a fact, man. But we can lead on this, and that would be really fun. So as an implementation tool, I want to suggest an independent movement politically, which we're doing. Well, I'm doing it, and a lot of people are joining me. And how I'm doing it is I'm not telling everybody all the things I hate. I'm gathering people together, telling them I really care about them, and asking them what they think, and letting them open the conversation. And I'm doing it through agriculture. I'm going to a hemp symposium this weekend at Texas A&M University. And hemp is going to be a uniting factor because it'll make us all rich, and we all want to hear about that. But we need to change our state government, which I hope we do, in favor of our political views, independent political views in 2 years. So I just want to say that I'm glad you presented your charts, and I'm addressing paradigm shift without even knowing it. So intuitively, I felt like, yes, the people are stubborn. Yes, we don't want to change. And I'm not going to go in and make them raise their hackles and raise their fur. I'm just going to say, well, what do you think? And they're going to get to hear what they think, even if it's wrong. they get to hear themselves say it. And eventually we'll gently and lovingly, probably quickly actually, because of the anticipated collapse. Okay, you told me what you think. Now what are we going to do? And let's do it. So I think I see a quick pathway, if I made any sense in what I just said.
Let's hope you're right.
We'll see. I mean, it's a try. We might as well try. There's no harm in that.
Right, right. Right, Lucille, I must have said something.
Hi, Gwen, and thank you very much for the presentation. And maybe my question is piggybacking off of Paul's comments and then Fernanda's a little bit. And basically would just really appreciate if you could talk to this audience and the Alliance for Just Money event about the place, in your view, of the macro level reform of each nation's money system, and in relation to the other aspects and the time each and every aspect takes, and the limits that we have as mortal beings with, 24 hours of a day. Could you just flesh out from the background of your experience and what you know about AFJM and the Monetary Reform Act that we're working on, and other approaches maybe to that same goal, but at the nation state level of the current, reforming the current money system? And so get into those weeds a little bit in ways that help us to better understand how to achieve that goal using or not using the other aspects that you addressed.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting, but it's also, I think, rare that unilateral action on the part of one nation state changes the monetary system. We did see an example of that when Nixon took us off the gold standard back in the 70s, but the system before that really was based on Bretton Woods, so it was an international collaboration. It wasn't a single nation state making that decision. And I've had feedback on even some of the ideas I've put forward in the past that, oh yeah, well, Bank of International Settlements will never allow that to happen. They are very powerful when it comes to the monetary system. I think it's a mistake for us to imagine that it's just a national system. It's an international system, and international powerhouses control it. So while I completely support AMRA, I completely support the work of the Alliance for Just Money, I think it's a difficult task. And it's going to take paradigm change. It's going to take some kind of shock that isn't set up by the oligarchs to make us all suffer. And so they can shift the rules in the middle of the game, which is actually what happens most of the time, right? That's how the big rule changes happen, is they decide to change them to our detriment, get together and do it and cover it up with some kind of international shock therapy. You should read that book. It's a Naomi Klein. Anyway, the shock doctrine. So I think the likely moment when AMRA will have the possibility of being passed is very similar to the moment when it almost passed in the last century. There has to be a collapse. There has to be something that triggers massive action. I doubt very much that this Congress, or even the Congress that's elected next week, has even the mindset they need to do that. They all benefit from the system. Imagining that there's people, there might be a handful of people in Congress that are on our side, but for the most part, they're not. They're the beneficiaries of the system. They like very much controlling the power that they have and keeping the power that they have. It's going to take a bigger disruption, I think, and the bigger disruption may well come. But for us to be able to act on that, we have to be organized. We have to have a set of talking points. We have to have some people that are ready to be the vanguard to bring it forward. I I wish I had more optimistic outlook, but just working at it in Vermont and seeing the games that were played there and the people that were in power that were stopping it from happening, it's tough game. We'd go into the lieutenant governor's office and he'd say, you know, I really think your ideas are great, but you and what army? I mean, they'd say that to us about the kind of even relatively minor changes we were proposing in Vermont. So, you know, and people were hurt. I mean, they went after us, the people that were pushing for a public bank in Vermont. Now, the public bank that we got in Vermont, it's not really a public bank, but it's a step in that direction. With the credit facility we created there, it's still running and it's been doing great. The Vermont Treasurer's Office has been investing 10% of their average daily balance into the Vermont economy for the last 10 years now. And it's produced a return on their investment that's orders of magnitude higher than the money they put in the private banks. And yet, even with proof of concept, when we went back to the legislature to try and get them to take the next step and actually put the state's money, that means the money that the state collects in taxes that we get from the federal government, that all of that into a Vermont state bank, we weren't even allowed to testify in front of the committees at that point, even though what we had pushed for was working and working very well. So, you know, that's just one state example, but I can tell you that on the federal level, it's even harder. I also think that if AMRA does get passed, it's a mistake to make it another monoculture. That it would be good if AMRA does get passed, that at least 2 types of money come out of that system. Maybe it's commercial money versus public money, or it's some dual currency system like they have in Switzerland, like they have in Bali, like they have in other places with relatively stable economies, so that if one system doesn't work, there'll at least be other systems there to help it be more resilient.
Okay, thank you. Those are helpful. Yeah, I just would point out for everybody, the Alliance is part of a international movement for monetary reform. That said, it's nowhere at the level of influence as the Bank of International Settlements, but your comments, you know, point out, and there are, Mark Young is in the room and he's our rep to the IMMR sort of core group. And, you know, thinking about the kind of action that the IMMR network could potentially do, you know, in relation to the Bank of International Settlements would be a good project for them to think about. So I'll leave it there, but thank you very much for your comments.
All right, there, I can see Nelson and Alex. Is it Alex that we haven't heard from yet?
Yeah, let's go with Alex and then Nelson, you can go.
Okay.
First off, thank you so much for your talk, the work you do, the way that you convey this messaging. It brings like a sense of relaxation and joy and excitement into something that's very, very challenging to think about and hear about in terms of all of the systems of injustice that just get recycled and reinforced through all of these complex, hard to comprehend mechanisms. So thank you. This work is something that has been like a passion both personally and more professionally over the last 4 years for me. But I still feel like I'm relatively a rookie. And I'm constantly wanting to stay in the mindset of wanting to learn new things. The thing that I'm really curious if you have extra resources, ideas, perspectives, recommendations on is something that I'm focused on, which is if we get monetary reform, local currencies, if we get a universal basic income going, one of the patterns that seems to be emerging in a lot of places where there has been successful implementation of support is that the market equilibriums restabilize at a level where there's poverty again. And that like having competitive equilibrium that determines supply and demand's price equilibrium requires that people are competing against each other for meeting their basic needs, and increasing access to wealth sort of increases the buying pressure that drives up that demand curve, and then prices go up, and it recursively reestablishes scarcity. I've been really excitedly working on some of the math around that, but I'm really curious anytime I can hear about success stories or studies that have tracked and found ways of articulating that well, or anything in that whole world. Not sure if that's completely peripheral, but it's...
No, it isn't. I think what you're talking about, though, is another function of monoculture money.
Mm-hmm.
If let's just say, for the sake of argument, we got a universal basic income that was issued to us in 4 kinds of currency, at least, you know, just for the sake of argument, we'd have a food currency that would be for food, and we could spend it on food and anything related to food. We'd have an energy currency that would be the carbon currency. We'd have a business currency that could be used for growing businesses. And let's say time would be the other thing that could be traded. I don't think we'd have that same problem, because you'd have a number of different types of mechanisms used for different markets. So you're not getting the kind of cross-market competition. And also you wouldn't have the worry of like getting all this money out there and having everybody buy things that are high carbon content and making global climate change worse, because that could be much more carefully controlled to meet the needs, but without the Hummers and the yachts and the private airplanes that are now really driving climate change. So I don't know the answer to that completely, because it's hard to find good examples. But if you look at Switzerland and what's happened there with the VIR, you can see that the existence of the VIR has had a counter-cyclical effect on their economy, which means that when economic things are going great in Switzerland, they're using francs to go to the, you know, Mediterranean and have a nice vacation in Nice. But when the economy turns down, they turn back to the VIR, and they're able to keep people paid, keep the economy running, even with the downturn. And so if you can imagine that happening in a few different currencies instead of just 2, right, it would be much more resilient, and we wouldn't have poverty anymore. It's possible to eliminate poverty. It's been done in a few places, but the fact that we have one artificially scarce bank debt currency that comes into existence with the issuance of interest creates this ultra competitive game on the macro level that we all lose. So changing money is central to the whole thing. And I think you'd see different dynamics in your markets with different kinds of money. Does that help?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you so much.
Sure, Nelson. Can you
hear me
unmute?
now? Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Yeah, first of all, Gwen, is the credit facility in Vermont, was that like a revolving fund?
Yeah.
Similar?
Yep.
Okay. And the other question is,
The difference is it was done with the balance in the treasurer's department. So it's not like it's after legislative appropriation. She was allowed to basically put her deposits effectively, even though they weren't deposits, in VEDA, which is the Vermont Economic Development Authority, and VSAC, which is the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, and VHFA, which is the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. And because in Vermont, we basically have a public bank already, because all of those entities are public entities. The difference is that the state's deposits don't go on deposit in that public bank and then are used for those things. So she would issue essentially a loan to VEDA. The first one that went out of her office at the time, well, this is back when Beth Pierce was treasurer, now there's a new treasurer, but was for $10 million for solar energy production, energy efficiency. things that Vita was financing. And she was able to offer at a lower interest rate than Vita could get in the commercial paper market, because here we have these public lending agencies and they're having to borrow money from Wall Street to do their lending, which is crazy, given
Yeah.
that the state has to send all of their deposits to these big Wall Street banks because they're the only banks big enough to handle the deposits under the current banking rules. So it's a win-win for everybody. Proof of concept, public banking works, and yet you haven't seen anything further happen in Vermont, unfortunately. But the facility is still going on. I just saw some articles about it recently. I'd wondered about it because a municipal leader had contacted me a few years ago, and I'd had them contact the treasurer's office to see if they could get a loan for their municipal needs. And I just wasn't sure what was going on with the loan at that point, the loan program. But
Okay, thank you. And let me, something else. I would love to be able to receive your research and your findings into this land back stuff, indigenous land. Is it possible? How do we stay in touch with you so we can get that kind of information?
oh, sure,
Like
you can.
any articles that you publish on that?
I haven't yet. I'm still
Okay.
doing research,
Okay.
but I'd be happy to send it to you when I have it.
Okay, super. Thank you. That's all.
I'll post it to Facebook. You and I are on Facebook together. So
Okay, thanks, Gwen.
all right. I see young Kim.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And I agree that you see the problem of the monoculture of the money. We need the many kind of currencies, many levels. But my thinking is that if we want to change or the reform the US dollar system. US dollar system is I think it's the currently one of the biggest and the primary money system in the world.
The dollar system is what you're saying?
US dollar, yes, US dollar system.
Yeah,
because
of course, it's the
everything
reserve
is
currency.
priced in US dollar currently. Yeah? Even Bitcoin is traded in US dollar.
Dollars, yep.
Yeah? But Bitcoin has their own system, but the US dollar is the basic primary system in terms of the transactions, world transactions, or daily payment or living.
Oil.
If we
Used to
want
have,
to keep,
petrodollars. You used to have to buy
Yeah.
all your oil in dollars. And every time somebody tried not to, we invaded them.
anyhow, if we want, we cannot eliminate the US dollar system at all. So we need to improve the US dollar system to work for everybody and work for the environment and also. So I need to at least the national banking and payment system. We need a more singular, uniform system rather than the different levels of all the regulated status straightly. When I looking at the EMRA clause by clause, line by line, I focus that the balance on the transaction account. Transaction account money is each individual customer's money in terms of your ownership, right? Ownership of the money. That ownership must be respected, honored. And so but we need to build one platform for everybody's ownership of his own money is respected. So the bank or the financial institute cannot do anything on that money. So that means the 100% reserve system. Yeah, if you
100% reserve. Well, that's what AMRIC creates.
yeah. So the balance at the transaction account is removed from the liability of the financial institution from the bank. So we need to rewrite the balance sheet of the banks. So the banks need to distinguish their asset under management, and asset under bailment. So if they each account holder's ownership is honored, it's separated from the bank liability. It's the whole system liability, not each individual bank's liability. So that kind of reform we need to think about, I think. And also,
when you get into balance
I
sheets
agree
and
with
bank-
your advocate for the dual currency system or complementary currency system. But anyhow, we need to improve the basic
we
primary
need to fix the other
system.
system too. Absolutely. I don't
Yeah.
disagree with that at all. It's interesting though, because when you get into banking balance sheets and all of that, you know, it's funny because you go into upside downtown, you know, the bank's assets are other people's liabilities. Like everything, what it's a joke about banking balance sheets, everything on the left is gone and everything on the right is wrong. Because you're in another world, you know, their assets are our loans to other people. That's an asset. So, you know, they start selling asset-based securities and they're basically slicing and dicing bad mortgages, right? But it sounds good to people. Oh, those are asset-based securities. That must be really good. But yes, you're right. And I think that what we talked about, because a bunch of us were in that class earlier this year where we were looking at the system solvency rules that would prevent these large corporate banks from collapsing and collapsing the economy with it. I mean, I think those are good proposals. I mean, I think making corporations systemically solvent is a great idea. And that would be a big step toward at least not having the entire economy come down every time the banks make a mistake, which is unfortunately what happens now. Anyway, Joe, did you have another question?
Well, yeah, you mentioned public cryptocurrency. I thought that was a fascinating comment. Some of our presenters in AFJM or AMI have talked about CBDCs, Kumhof, Umarova, even Stephanie Kelton has mentioned it. Joseph Huber, have you a position on this? To me, it's the same thing. I think it's the same thing, a public cryptocurrency or a CBDC.
As I understand it, and I'm not an expert on cryptocurrencies, but the last time I got into I dived down that rabbit hole, I found that there really are none yet. The IO system that was being developed is getting a little closer to the possibility, but my experience with that comes from when I was invited to California by the treasurer of California to discuss setting up a public bank in California to handle the cannabis industry, because the cannabis industry was about to go online as a legal industry, and yet they couldn't get a bank account because it was a controlled substance and the banks wouldn't touch it. So the state treasurer of California was having to send armored cars to the cannabis businesses to collect taxes. And they were looking to set up a public bank so that the cannabis industry could have bank accounts and pay their taxes. And when I thought about it, I mean, I was invited and they flew me out there and I thought about it long and hard. And what I said to the Cannabis Commission actually came as a bit of a surprise to them. I said, you know, public banks, the banks hate and will fight you all the way before you'll be able to establish that. And if you add cannabis to the mix, you know, that's going to be really difficult because the federal government hates that. So you've got two rather large enemies with this project. But if California developed a public cryptocurrency, one that was accepted for taxes and fees, and that could be used in cannabis transactions, that would solve the problem without the banks. Boy, did they fall back on that one. They were all sort of surprised. I think all it would take would be for a public entity like California to invest the money that other people who have developed cryptocurrencies have invested in developing it. and then accepting it for taxes and fees. If they had taken my advice on that, they could have probably changed the global economy overnight because California is such a big economy. But they kept plugging away at the public banking thing, and they still don't have a public bank in California years later. Not that it isn't a good thing to work on. Don't get me wrong. Go out and sign up for your local public banking advocacy group. Work as hard as you can. I'm not criticizing that. From my own experience, I'm not going to, I don't have a lot of confidence in that on the state level. I think that has to happen at the federal level for it to really happen. Now, it might still, in California, there's a lot of people still working hard. There's San Francisco wants a public bank. Oakland wants a public bank. LA, I was in LA for the Cannabis Commission. They've been working on a public bank. The LA group actually did a really good job of analyzing all the interest payments for public services. And estimating what they could save if they had a public bank, just because they wouldn't be paying interest to all the private banks for their infrastructure and schools and hospitals and everything else. But public cryptocurrency doesn't exist yet. If it did exist and was accepted for taxes and fees, we'd be in a different world.
Thank you.
It's all private and it all goes back to dollars. It's like a payment system for dollars. It really doesn't. It's not an alternative currency. It's not a complementary currency. It's just another way to move dollars around.
A payment system.
A payment system, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's what it should be. Yep.
Did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. You didn't actually address CBDCs, but
I haven't heard of them. CDBCs, that's an acronym that I don't recognize.
Well, you're the ever-ready bunny, so you should be knowing everything. Anyways, thanks.
What is it?
Take care.
Well, I guess I could answer it. Central bank digital currency.
Oh.
Yeah. So there you go. And it's okay if you're not an expert on it.
Digital currency isn't the same as cryptocurrency, though. There's a difference. I mean, digital currency can be time bank exchanges that are done by computer are considered a digital currency, but they're not a cryptocurrency. So I'm not sure that what the Federal Reserve is talking about with digital currency is necessarily cryptocurrency.
Well, the 97% money that you talked about being privatized, that's all digital. The banks don't have notes, right? It's all digital.
Right. Yeah. Digital currency isn't the same thing as crypto.
It would be digital too. But I like your idea of the
payment system. It can be both, but it is.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about digital currency, you're not necessarily talking about cryptocurrency.
No. As you say, it's best described. It should be a role of the payment system.
Yeah, blockchain has a lot of possibilities, and blockchain is a revolutionary and disruptive technology all on its own, for sure. And it is digital, but it's sort of the Venn diagram would cross, but it wouldn't be entirely in one or the other.
Yep.
I remember I gave a talk at MIT once about digital currencies. Bernard couldn't be there, and I got there and I gave the talk, and I had to leave early, and these bankers chased me out of the room. They had never heard of some of these things, and they looked scared. They like pinned me up against the wall and were like, "Tell me more about this." This was a long time ago now, though. Now they've probably heard of it. But the digital currency talk included a lot of different things. It wasn't just crypto.
Well, there's a new book by Yanis Varoufakis called The Techno-Feudalism.
Right.
And he says that the reason all of this bad press about these currencies is out there is because the banks know it's a huge threat to their profits. Because as you say, it becomes a new payment system and they don't get their little slice on every transaction.
And somebody in the comments asked me what I thought of BRICS. Again, I'm not an expert on BRICS, but what became clear to me in an article I think I read just yesterday in the New York Times was that the other BRICS, I've always thought these are the larger countries like Brazil and Russia and China and South Africa that fairly resilient economies on their own. What I didn't realize that also tied them all together was oil producing countries, that they all are oil producers. And so apparently some of the rules that BRICS have set up are designed to protect them from demands that they decarbonize, which of course burst my little bubble about BRICS maybe being a good alternative to the dollar system. Of course, dollar systems are different. Everybody's protecting these big oil companies rather than our planet.
Exactly. I've got you. Your biodiversity analogy to money, I think, kind of fails with money, because there's only one kind of money we want, just like there's only one kind of water we want, which is clean water. So you know, sometimes biodiversity isn't such a good thing. You don't want dirty water.
That doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry.
Well,
More than
I'm
kind of money
just saying,
actually works in
sometimes
economies, and it's been proven that it works in economies. It's not necessary. A monoculture as a system is easily threatened by one small thing going wrong. It's not a very resilient system.
I agree, but water, like money, is a universal need, and that water has to be clean. And we want sovereign money.
We don't need money. We existed as a species for millions of years without money. We don't need money. I'm sorry, but we do need clean water. And the monetary system that we have is not helping with that.
No,
but
I would like to maybe, this is very much a back and forth right now, and we do have a larger
Other people,
audience. So thank you for your comments, Joe, and your dialogue. Gwen, I see Warren has his hand up. We have about 9 minutes left, and so we will leave it at Warren, and then I'll let you have some closing remarks, and then Fernanda can take the lead to help us exit the room. So Warren, go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, as a part of that last thing about the biodiversity or having different currencies at different levels, I think it's a question of monetary sovereignty. And I know people might be familiar with MMT and may not be I'm not particular fans of it, but there are aspects of it to understand the concept of chattelism, which is based on the state issue of money. It's not a part of the money. It doesn't exist. It's a feature of the law. It's what the government says it is, but which government? In the United States, it's only the federal government can issue currency directly and spend it into the economy without taxing it. And you only need the taxes to return back the surplus money so you control the value so you don't cause inflation. So why not have a global sovereign currency, national sovereign currencies, local or state, so that all of the governing bodies would have their own monetary sovereignty and issue the money directly into their own economy, like Berkshire's, for example, if they were real money issued by the Bank of what I think of the name of the town. So then that money would circulate locally and be used locally, and then it would have an exchange rate to the other currencies, either the state currency or the federal currency, and then the world currency. Then and it all would be water, because we'd all have wells, right? And we'd all have, but somebody's well might be a little cleaner, so we might prefer water from Vermont or from Poland Springs, or Fiji. You know, we might like Fiji water better because it's cleaner. So yeah, having clean water, but having the sovereign control and having issued as a tax credit, not as a debt. Right now,
that's chattelism, sure. And I think that's a halfway decent system. It's not what we have, and that's where I depart and disagree with MMT. They're behaving as if we had it already when we really don't. But the system you've just described, where sovereignty and seigniorage, right, would be ascribed to different levels of government, would still be a multi-currency system, even if the currencies were quite similar, because they could be adjusted for their local conditions. I mean, part of the problem with having one form of money that runs everything. It's been compared to a soccer game going on, right? Where the lungs that everybody is using to breathe, from the players that have to run down the field 100 times to the old guy sitting in the stands, are the same lungs. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, money is a means of exchange. It's a medium, it's a flow. It's not a thing in itself. It
Right.
should enable the economy, not monopolize.
Not a commodity. And
Right.
It like one, but it doesn't have a value. Like it goes down to that. Land has value, but it's constant. It's the dollar that goes up and down. Land value doesn't go up. The dollar goes down. The price of gold, the value of gold hasn't gone up. The price of gold seems to have gone up because the value of money simply has gone down. And that might go down infinitively. And I don't know, but we don't understand it that way. We got it backwards. What is a commodity and what is a measure of the commodity. And I think that's we have to define our terms, that money is an abstract concept rooted in law. Land is a commodity and it doesn't fluctuate in value. It's the standard by which we measure the money. So I think we have to really, there's a book, Robert DeFremre has a book that I got at AMI one time, The Twin Privileges, the privilege of land and the privileges of money. It's a really short little book, and I think it's very informative. I really enjoyed this. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for listening to me.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Warren. All right. I think we're done then. And I can make another last comment. I'd say, you know, all of you are in the right place. You're working on changing the system. And I just wish you Godspeed, because the system has to change, or we're not going to survive as a species. Maybe that's not the end of the world, but it's certainly the end of our world. I'd like to survive as a species. I'd like the other species I share this planet with to survive as well. And I think it's just super important that we make this a priority. So that's my ending comment. Happy to play another song. I do have a song about revolution if you want to hear that one.
Very beautifully said, Gwen. I appreciate that. And I think it's important to note that we're all doing important work and everyone's efforts are valuable. So yeah, we'll make the world a better place together, even if we're approaching it from different angles, because that's what we're going to need, right, to change people's minds. Fernanda, do you want to give us a shout out for an upcoming coffee houses? And then Gwendolyn, I would love if you would close us out with a song.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead and load that up in your tabs, Gwen. For the rest of y'all, I have some announcements. We are planning our next events and coffee houses to keep us all together and entertained in community, working together. So the next coffee house will actually be a sort of working group, and we'll present multiple tasks that we're doing. But we're not just going to put you to work in the coffee houses. The December one, which is, Ryan will throw the dates in the chat, hopefully. We're going to have some collaborative art time. This past year, we finalized our collaborative art piece that we celebrated at May Day, and I can share the link to how that turned out too. So we're going to be also hearing the songs from Monetary Reform and hopefully rewriting some lyrics of friendly Christmas songs around monetary themes as well. And I have a lot of those parody songs to share with y'all, and hope that you can come and subscribe and follow, and yep, just be in the movement. Be the water that flows to where it needs to be.
All right. So you want to do the song?
Yep. Thank you all for showing up tonight. Very glad to be back into our coffee houses, and hopefully we'll see you in November and December. Quick note that those are on the 3rd Monday. Usually we meet on the 4th Mondays, but holidays, so we're pushing it up a week. So go ahead, Gwen.
All right, here we go. This is the Revolution song.
food.
Grow your food.
Plant more trees.
Plant more trees.
Bike to work.
Bike to work. Keep some bees.
Start a time bank. Join a land trust. Turn your compost. Ride the bus. Be the change.
Be the change. Be a solution. Regeneration.
Revolution. Raise a child.
Raise a child.
Get a vision.
Get a vision.
Live simple lives. Learn ancient wisdom. Reparation.
Reparations for
Colonization. Stop racial discrimination. Be the change.
Be the change. Be a solution.
Regeneration. Revolution. People power.
People power.
Open space.
Open space.
Community is our saving grace. Local action. State demands. Healthy soil access to lands. Be the change.
Be the change. Be a solution.
Regeneration. Revolution. Game changers.
Game changers.
Fire keepers.
Fire keepers.
Monkey wrenchers. Faith leapers.
Come together.
Unified. We must change or we will die. Be the change.
Be the change. Be a solution.
Regeneration. Revolution.
Be the change. Be a solution.
Regeneration. Revolution.
Sorry. Did you get that? Did it show?
Yeah.
And you could
Yes,
hear
it
it?
did. Yep.
Okay.
I I hope so. I saw people dancing, so.
That was great. Yay. I'd like to put that in my Facebook.
Well, it's on the Global Community Initiative's YouTube channel. All of our songs are. So you're welcome to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you
All right.
all.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Be the change.